All right, so now we are on to chapter 6, which is all about the cell. So this section, 6.2, is titled Eukaryotic cells have internal membranes that compartmentalize their functions. So that means all eukaryotic cells, we're going to talk about what that means, have internal membranes. So they have these layers of phospholipids that break up their different sections that do their own jobs. That's what compartmentalize means. So they break up the cell into different compartments that can function better to do their own specific jobs. So the basic structural and functional unit of every organism is one of two types of cells. So you guys know that cells are the basic unit of life, but there's two specific kinds, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. And of the three domains of life, which are bacteria, archaea, and eukarya, we kind of skimmed over this, but bacteria and archaea have prokaryotic cells, and protists, animals, fungi, and plants are all eukaryotic cells. So let's talk about what that means. So before we split up the two groups into the differences, let's talk about some basic characteristics of all cells. All cells have a plasma membrane, meaning an outside. If they didn't have a plasma membrane, they wouldn't be a cell, because what would be holding them together? So all cells have a plasma membrane. All cells have a semi-fluid substance called cytosol. Probably heard this called cytoplasm before. It is the cytoplasm. It's made of cytosol, whatever we want to call it, cytoplasm, cytosol, same thing. But they all have this stuff on the inside of the cell, kind of like the jelly that holds it all together. They all have chromosomes, so that's very important. They all have genetic information, and it's stored as chromosomes. Chromosomes are going to be of different structures, but they all have chromosomes. And they all have ribosomes to make proteins, because without ribosomes, we would have no proteins, and we know that proteins perform all the functions and regulate all cellular processes, meaning act as enzymes inside our cells. So every single living thing, every single cell has all four of those things, so remember that. Prokaryotic cells, we are not, so we do not have any prokaryotic cells that are human. Of the bacteria living in your body, there's prokaryotic cells, but human cells are not prokaryotic. Pro means before, and karyo means nucleus in this case, so prokaryotic cells means before a nucleus. So these were the original cells, and they don't have a nucleus. So that's very important. That's the main difference between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells, is that prokaryotic cells have no nucleus. And so they still have DNA, but instead it's kept inside this unbound region inside the cell right here called the nucleoid. So it's just kind of like, it's all clumped together in what's called a nucleoid, but it is not a nucleus. They have no membrane-bound organelles, which means that none of their organelles are kept in by a membrane. There's a lot of those inside eukaryotic cells that are, but prokaryotic cells do not have those. And the cytoplasm, or the cytosol, is kept in by a plasma membrane. So they do have a plasma membrane and a cytosol. So this is what a basic prokaryotic cell looks like. Well, this is a typical rod-shaped bacterium. We can see the nucleoid inside here. This is where their chromosomes are. Notice they're not shaped like X's like ours, but they are there. They generally have a cell wall. Right inside that cell wall is the plasma membrane, and then they also have ribosomes. These external structures we'll talk about much later. And then there's eukaryotic cells. Eu means true, EU, and so true nucleus is what eukaryotic means. We do have a nucleus. And our DNA is stored inside of this nucleus, and the nucleus has a nuclear membrane, which is made of plasma membrane as well. So this is a membrane-bound organelle that eukaryotic cells have that prokaryotic cells do not have. We also have lots of other membrane-bound organelles, so keep that in mind, that we have all these organelles which are held together by a membrane, or our organelles are systems of membranes. And then we have a lot of cytoplasm in between the membrane, the plasma membrane on the outside, and the nucleus. So we do also have a cytoplasm inside of our cells. And eukaryotic cells are generally much larger than prokaryotic cells because we have more things to do more jobs, so we can get a little bigger. Let's talk about what the plasma membrane is. So it's you've heard it called the cell membrane before. It is the cell membrane. It is a selective barrier because we want to allow the good things in and the bad things out.
In the name of the Father.
So it allows good things in bad things out. It's very important that it's selectively permeable, so we don't allow things we don't want inside our cells inside. It does a pretty good job of that. So it allows oxygen, nutrients in, and when we need to get waste out, it lets waste out. And this is where our phospholipids come in. Remember, our glycerol attached to two fatty acids with a phosphate on the other side. Our phospholipids are what make up the cell membrane. So it's usually a double layer of phospholipids because, remember, fatty acids, lipids, are hydrophobic because they're nonpolar, so they hide on the inside, while the phosphates, remember, they have a charge on them. They're negative, so they're attracted to the water, so they stick outside and inside to the cytosol. So the hydrophobic parts are on the inside, the hydrophilic parts are on the outside. Then there's a lot of other things, proteins, side chains. We'll talk about that when we get to a different chapter. And it's really important to note that cells cannot get to be very big. That's why as we get older, so we start off as babies and then grow into adults, our cell sizes don't really change. What happens is the number of cells that we have changes because our cells can't get to be very large because I don't have anything here to explain it. So we need to get all these materials into and out of the cell, and we only have a certain amount of cell surface size. So we must be really good at exchanging good materials for bad materials. But as you get really big, our cells get really big, think about how far it would take to travel good things into the middle of the cell and bad things out. So it makes more sense to keep our cells all pretty small, which is why cells don't get to be too big. So the surface area to volume ratio of the cell is what is key. Because as the surface area increases by n squared, the volume increases by n cubed. So surface area increases exponentially more than volume does as the cell gets bigger. And you want to have more surface area to volume. For example, here, this cell is 1 square by 1 square, right? 1 square by 1 square by 1 square. So the surface area is 6, but the volume is only 1. So the surface area to volume ratio of this tiny little guy is 1. Here, the total surface area is 150, the total volume is 125. So now the surface area to volume ratio is only 1.2, which is far, far smaller than this, and we want to have a really big surface area to volume ratio. So if we break this guy up into ones that are all this size, but just take up the same amount of space, but rather we have 25 now instead of 1. Now our surface area to volume ratio is back to 6, which is really important. So,
reminder to all students who received a detention yesterday.
So, a eukaryotic cell has internal membranes that partition the cell into organelles. So all of these things that you see in here are membranes that act as organelles or break up into organelles. So here's the Golgi apparatus, and it's made of a bunch of different membranes. And here's the mitochondria, and it's made of a bunch of different membranes. So all of these things are things that prokaryotic cells don't have because they don't have these membrane-bound organelles. And there's a plant cell, same thing. You can see even their chloroplast is made of membranes. Their mitochondria, their rough ER, their nuclear envelope, these are things that are all made of membranes, which is why we only have them in eukaryotic cells and not in our prokaryotic cells.